Ever been in a room where everyone thinks they know you, but couldn't be more wrong? That's exactly where I found myself last month. Sitting at my husband Samuel's family dinner, wondering how 9 years of my life had slowly turned me into invisible furniture. I was wedged into an antique dining chair that looked elegant but felt like punishment, at his mother Helen's long mahogany table. The kind of table designed to impress guests and intimidate anyone who didn't quite belong. These dinners were a monthly ritual, family tradition, Helen liked to call it. Reconnecting over good food, bonding. In reality, it was her carefully curated stage to remind everyone just how superior her family was. I cut into my steak, overpriced, underseasoned, while the usual soundtrack played around me. Helen bragging about her latest charity committee, casually name-dropping donors like she was reading from a guest list at a gala. Her husband Robert nodded along, as if every word she spoke was carved into stone tablets. Derek, Samuel's younger brother, talked loudly about nothing, mistaking volume for importance. And then there was Ashley. Samuel's older sister had a rare talent for turning every conversation into a spotlight on herself. She sat across from me in a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly groceries, swirling her wine like she was a sommelier instead of someone who'd driven 3 businesses into the ground. She smiled the way people do when they're about to say something cruel but entertaining. "You know," Ashley said casually, dragging out the moment, "I was telling my friend Jessica about our family dinners. She was so impressed by how diverse our group is." Diverse. Code for, look at the charity case we let sit at our table. I kept eating. I'd learned that skill early in this family. Stay quiet, don't react, don't rock the boat. Harmony, they said, was more important than dignity. Samuel laughed at something Mark, Ashley's husband, had said. Mark worked in insurance and never missed a chance to talk about his latest big deal, like a walking business card nobody asked for. Then Ashley set her wine glass down. The sound was deliberate, sharp, final. She looked straight at me, smirked, and said, "So, Emily, how does it feel being the most useless person at this table?" The words hung in the air. For a second, no one moved. Then the laughter came. My husband's nervous chuckle. Helen covering her mouth with her napkin. Robert's low, approving laugh. Derek snorting into his beer. Even Mark, who still owed me $12,000, laughed like Ashley had just delivered comedy gold. And in that moment, something inside me snapped into focus. Not rage. Clarity. The kind that feels like someone quietly placing keys into your hand. Keys to a door you'd been too afraid to open. I smiled. Not the polite smile I'd worn for 9 years. This one was different. I set down my fork, straightened my back, and met Ashley's eyes. "How does it feel?" I asked calmly, knowing this useless woman won't be paying your bills anymore. The laughter died instantly, and that was the moment everything began to unravel. I was 34 years old when I finally understood how quietly a person can disappear inside a marriage. On paper, my life looked stable, respectable, even lucky if you asked the right people. I had a solid career, consulting work that didn't sound flashy enough to impress strangers at dinner parties, but paid very real bills. I worked from home most days, dressed comfortably, built my own schedule, answered to clients instead of bosses. To people like Helen, that translated to unambitious. To Ashley, it meant replaceable. Samuel and I met in college. He was charming in that easy, unthreatening way. Not loud, not flashy. He listened more than he spoke, made me feel seen when I talked about ideas that mattered to me. We studied in the same library corner, bonded over late-night coffee runs, shared dreams that felt enormous back then. Travel, stability, a life that didn't revolve around proving ourselves to anyone. We dated for 4 years before getting married. Back then, I believed marriage meant partnership, mutual respect, growth together. I didn't realize how easily together can turn into alone, even when someone sleeps beside you every night. The first time I met his family, I tried hard. I wore the right dress, asked polite questions, complimented Helen's cooking, her home, her taste in art. I laughed when I was supposed to, stayed quiet when conversations turned sharp. I told myself they just needed time to warm up to me. They never did. Helen was polite, but cold, always correcting small things, how I set the table, how I pronounced certain words, how I talked about my work. Robert rarely spoke directly to me at all, unless it was to ask Samuel something through me, like I was a hallway instead of a person. Ashley was worse. She smiled when she insulted, asked questions that weren't really questions. So, what exactly do you do all day? Oh, must be nice not having a real office. You're lucky Samuel doesn't mind being the ambitious one. Samuel never stopped her. That should have mattered more to me. At first, I thought staying quiet was maturity, compromise. I told myself family dynamics were messy, that love meant endurance. I convinced myself that if I didn't react, things would eventually soften. Instead, they learned something dangerous. They learned I would absorb discomfort so everyone else could stay comfortable. The financial help started small. Ashley's boutique was struggling. Rent late, inventory unpaid, suppliers calling nonstop. Samuel came to me one night, voice heavy with concern. "She's really trying," he said. "She just needs a little help to get through this." I agreed. Because that's what you do for family. Because I believed generosity would be remembered. It wasn't. Then Derek got into trouble. Legal fees, court costs, another temporary crisis, another quiet transfer, another problem solved without acknowledgement. Then Helen's phone calls. Always emotional, always urgent, always framed as family emergency. Property taxes, investments gone wrong, the risk of embarrassment in their social circle. Each time, Samuel would look at me with that familiar expression, hopeful, apologetic, trusting. And each time, I said yes. I never announced it, never demanded credit, never kept score out loud. I told myself it was fine. But slowly, invisibly, my role changed. I wasn't a daughter-in-law anymore. I was a solution, a resource, an ATM that didn't require respect to function. By the time Ashley called me useless at that dinner table, I realized something terrifying. They didn't just underestimate me. They had built their lives around the assumption that I would always stay silent and keep paying. And that realization, that was the beginning of the end. Looking back now, the warning signs were everywhere. They just never arrived loudly enough for me to feel justified calling them danger. It started with small shifts, things so subtle I brushed them off as stress, bad timing, misunderstandings. Samuel coming home later than usual from work, always with an explanation ready. His phone face down on the counter more often. Conversations that used to be shared, now happening in fragments. "How was your day?" I'd ask. "Fine," he'd answer, already scrolling. Fine became his favorite word. At family dinners, the tone shifted too. Ashley's jokes got sharper, less playful, more precise. The kind that landed just hard enough to sting, but soft enough to deny if confronted. "Oh, Emily works from home," she'd say to new guests. "So she has a lot of flexibility." Flexibility, spoken like a flaw. Helen started asking questions that felt less like curiosity and more like audits. "Your business still doing well?" "You know grants can dry up any time." Samuel carries a lot of responsibility, doesn't he? Always Samuel. Never us. Samuel never corrected her. That silence became its own answer. One night, after a particularly uncomfortable dinner, I brought it up in the car. "She doesn't respect me," I said quietly, staring out the window. "Ashley." Samuel sighed like I'd inconvenienced him. "That's just how she jokes. Don't take everything so personally." "But she does it every time." "You're reading into it," he replied. "She's under a lot of stress." Stress. That excuse followed everything. Ashley's tone, Derek's entitlement, Helen's dismissiveness. Stress was the universal solvent that dissolved accountability. I began noticing how often my money came up, without ever being mentioned. Ashley talking about expanding her boutique. Derek casually mentioning legal bills. Helen lamenting unexpected expenses with a dramatic sigh. Always within earshot, always followed by a glance at Samuel, and Samuel would glance at me, not asking, expecting. I told myself it was temporary, that families go through phases, that love means patience. But patience started feeling like self-erasure. I kept records, not out of suspicion, but habit. I'd always been careful with finances. Spreadsheets, receipts, email confirmations. It was just responsibility, I told myself. Nothing more. Still, there were moments that stuck with me. Ashley thanking Samuel publicly for supporting her dream, while I stood beside him, invisible. Helen praising her son for being such a provider, knowing full well whose account the money came from. Samuel accepting that praise without correcting a single word. That hurt more than Ashley's jokes ever could. The worst part wasn't the money. It was the realization that I was being quietly rewritten in their family story. I wasn't the woman who helped. I wasn't the one who stepped up. I wasn't even a character. I was a background utility, valuable only when silent. And somewhere deep down, I think they assumed I would never stop being that. By the time we reached that dinner, the one where Ashley finally said the quiet part out loud, the tension had already been building for years. I just hadn't let myself see it until the moment she called me useless. Until the moment I realized they weren't joking anymore. They meant it. That dinner should have ended right there. After my words landed, after the laughter died and silence swallowed the room, I should have stood up, walked out, and never looked back. But I didn't. I stayed. And that was when the real damage began. Ashley recovered first. She always did. Shock flickered across her face for half a second before she smoothed it over with indignation. "What are you even talking about?" she snapped. "I don't need your money." Helen straightened in her chair, napkin folded carefully in her lap, like armor. "Emily, that was completely inappropriate," she said, her voice calm but sharp. "We don't discuss finances at the table." Robert cleared his throat. "This family doesn't air dirty laundry." Dirty laundry. 9 years of silence had trained them well. Samuel finally spoke. "Emily, can we not do this right now?" he said quietly, not meeting my eyes. "You embarrassed everyone." That was the moment. Not Ashley's insult, not the laughter. That sentence. "You embarrassed everyone." My chest tightened. My hands went cold. I could hear my heartbeat louder than the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. I realized I was shaking, not from anger, but from something deeper. Disbelief. Grief. The sick understanding that my husband had chosen his family's comfort over my dignity without hesitation. "I was embarrassed," I said slowly, my voice steady only because I forced it to be. "For 9 years," Ashley scoffed. "Oh, please, you act like you're some kind of martyr." I looked at her. Really looked. At the woman whose rent I'd paid when her boutique was days from foreclosure. At the woman who wore success like costume jewelry, borrowed and loud. At the woman who had just laughed while calling me useless. I pushed my chair back and stood. "I'm done," I said, "with this." Helen's eyes widened. "Done with what?" "With pretending," I replied. "With swallowing disrespect so everyone else can feel superior." Samuel reached for my wrist. "Emily, stop. You're overreacting." I pulled my hand away. "No," I said. "I'm finally reacting." That night, we drove home in silence. Samuel stared straight ahead, jaw tight, like he was bracing for an argument he still believed he could win. I watched streetlights blur past the window and felt something inside me harden, not into bitterness, but resolve. At home, I didn't cry. That surprised me. Instead, I opened my laptop, not to work, to look. Bank statements, transfers, years of them. Monthly payments I'd set up to make everyone's life easier. Ashley's rent, her insurance, the family emergency account that somehow only ever helped his family. The college fund I'd been quietly building for Derek's son because no one else seemed to think ahead. I stared at the numbers, and for the first time, I didn't feel proud. I felt used. The next morning, I woke up at 6:30 like always. Samuel was still asleep. I made coffee, sat at my desk, and logged into my banking app. One by one, I canceled every automatic transfer. No drama, no announcement, just clicks. 9 years of obligation erased in less than 10 minutes. As I closed my laptop, a strange calm settled over me. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Nothing would ever be the same again. The first 3 days after I canceled the transfers were eerily quiet. No frantic calls, no emotional emergencies, no dramatic pleas wrapped in the word family. It almost made me question myself. Maybe they hadn't noticed yet. Maybe the system was lagging. Maybe, just maybe, they didn't actually need me the way I thought they did. That illusion shattered on Friday morning. My phone buzzed at 10:02 a.m. Unknown number. I let it ring. A minute later, another call, then another. By noon, my screen looked like a panic attack. Missed calls, voicemails, texts stacking on top of each other. Ashley's name finally appeared. "Emily, I think there's a bank error. This is serious. Call me back." What the hell is going on? I didn't respond. At 2:17 p.m., Samuel called. "Babe," he said the second I answered, already stressed. "What's happening? Ashley's freaking out. Her rent payment didn't go through from our account somehow." Our account. The phrase landed wrong. "I canceled the transfers," I said calmly. Silence. "You what?" "I stopped paying for your sister's business, and the emergency fund, and everything else." Another pause, longer this time. I could hear him breathing, processing, recalibrating. "You can't be serious," he said finally. "She depends on that money." "Exactly," I replied, "and that's the problem." He laughed, not kindly, not nervously, dismissively. "Oh my God, you're being dramatic. I get that your feelings were hurt, but this is way too far. Just call the bank and fix whatever you did." That laugh told me everything I needed to know. 9 years of quiet sacrifice reduced to hurt feelings. 9 years of financial responsibility reframed as drama. "I'm not calling anyone," I said. "Ashley wanted to know what being useless felt like. Now she gets to learn what happens when the useless one stops being useful." He hung up on me. That evening, the front door slammed so hard the walls rattled. Samuel stormed into my office, heels clicking across the hardwood, face flushed, tie loosened, anger barely contained. "I spent 2 hours calming down my sister," he snapped. "She's crying, Emily, crying because of your childish tantrum." "Childish," I repeated slowly. "Is that what you call not paying for her business anymore?" "You know what I mean," he said, pacing. "She needs that money." I stood and walked to my filing cabinet. "She needs money from someone she treats like garbage," I said, pulling out a thick folder. "That's not my responsibility." "What is all this?" he asked, watching me. I laid the documents out on my desk. Bank statements, transfers, emails, receipts. Years of quiet problem solving, organized and labeled. "This," I said, "is every time I saved your family." His face changed as he read. Shock, confusion, something close to fear. "I didn't realize," he whispered. "You didn't realize money doesn't magically appear," I replied. "That every time your family panicked, it was my account that fixed it?" "We're married," he said weakly. "Our money is our money." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. "I make 6 figures. You don't. Your family thanks you for money I earned. When exactly did that become shared effort?" He sank into the chair. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. I looked at him, the man I married, the man who let me be humiliated, the man who benefited from my silence without ever defending me. "Now," I said, gathering the papers back into the folder, "everyone learns what independence actually costs." And I wasn't done yet. By Saturday morning, the silence was gone. It was replaced by chaos. Helen called first. I watched her name flash on my phone while I stood in the kitchen, stirring coffee that had already gone cold. I let it ring. She called again, and again. On the 4th attempt, I answered. "Emily, she said tightly, skipping pleasantries. "There seems to be some kind of misunderstanding." "There isn't," I replied. A sharp inhale. Ashley's rent bounced. Her insurance payment failed. Vendors are calling. This reflects very poorly on the family. On the family. Not on Ashley. Not on Samuel. On the family brand. "For years," Helen continued, "we've handled our matters privately. This disruption is unnecessary." I leaned against the counter, suddenly tired. "What's unnecessary," I said, "is pretending your family wasn't relying on my money while treating me like I didn't exist." Her tone hardened. "You married into this family. That comes with responsibilities." I smiled, though she couldn't see it. "And I fulfilled mine," I said. "For 9 years. She hung up on me. The texts started after that. Ashley, Derek, even Robert. Short, clipped messages that read more like demands than questions. "This needs to be fixed. We can't have instability right now. Samuel needs to get you under control." Under control. That phrase echoed in my mind longer than it should have. Samuel tried again that afternoon. Softer this time, more careful. "They're scared," he said. "You pulled the rug out from under them." "No," I replied. I stopped holding it up. He rubbed his face. "My parents think you're doing this to punish them. I'm doing this to be kinder to myself." He didn't answer. That evening, Ashley showed up at our house unannounced. Her mascara was smudged. Her confidence cracked just enough to show the panic underneath. "You can't do this to me," she said the moment I opened the door. "You know how close I am to losing everything." I studied her face, the same face that had smirked across the dinner table while calling me useless. "I know exactly how close you are," I said calmly. "I've always known." She scoffed, desperation flashing. "This is about a joke? Grow up." "It was never a joke," I replied. "It was the truth you felt comfortable saying out loud." She crossed her arms. "So what, you're going to ruin me?" "No," I said. "I'm going to stop saving you." Her voice broke. "I can't survive without that support." "That's not my fault." She stared at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. For the first time, I didn't feel guilt. I felt something steadier. Boundary. That night, lying in bed beside Samuel, I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of confrontation, not of disapproval, not of being alone. I'd already been alone, just quietly, and something inside me shifted. I stopped seeing myself through their eyes, stopped measuring my worth by how useful I was to people who didn't respect me. By the time Sunday came, I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was changing, and they could feel it. Sunday, not peaceful, empty. Samuel slept on the far edge of the bed, his back turned toward me, like distance could solve what silence had already destroyed. I stared at the ceiling, counting cracks in the paint, listening to the hum of the refrigerator downstairs, wondering how a marriage could unravel without a single dramatic explosion. No yelling, no slammed doors, just absence. By Monday morning, the weight settled in. The guilt came first. The familiar voice in my head asking if I'd gone too far, if cutting off support so abruptly made me cruel, if I was becoming the villain in their story the way Ashley insisted. Then came doubt. What if I was selfish? What if love really did mean endurance without limits? What if I'd misunderstood my role all along? I sat at my desk, staring at my computer screen, unable to focus. My work, normally grounding, felt distant. Every email notification startled me. Every vibration of my phone made my chest tighten. Around noon, Samuel texted, "We need to talk tonight." No apology. No concern. Just instruction. That afternoon, I found myself in the bathroom, gripping the sink, staring at my reflection like I was looking for someone else's face. Someone stronger. Someone who knew exactly what she was doing. "You're allowed to stop," I whispered to myself. But the words didn't feel real yet. That evening, Samuel finally spoke. Really spoke, but not the way I'd hoped. "My parents think this marriage might not survive if you keep acting like this," he said, standing in the living room, arms crossed. Acting like this. 9 years, reduced to behavior that needed correction. I felt something break, not loudly, but completely. "So that's it?" I asked. Their comfort determines whether I'm worth staying married to? He didn't answer. That was his answer. After he went to bed, I sat alone in the dark, laptop open, not working, just scrolling through old emails, old messages, memories of when I believed love meant mutual protection. That's when I opened the folder again, the one I'd kept for years without knowing why. Every receipt, every transfer, every contract. And suddenly the truth hit me with brutal clarity. I hadn't been weak. I'd been systematic, careful, responsible, prepared, and I wasn't powerless. I was just quiet. But silence, I realized, was a choice, and I didn't have to make it anymore. That was the lowest point. Not when they laughed at me, not when Samuel dismissed my pain, but when I finally understood how much of myself I'd given away without ever being asked. And that realization hurt more than anything else. The realization didn't come with fireworks. It came quietly, like truth usually does when you finally stop running from it. I was sitting alone in my office late that night, the house silent except for the faint ticking of the wall clock. Samuel had gone to bed without another word. No apology, no attempt to understand, just distance. I opened the safe behind my desk, the fireproof one. I hadn't touched it in years. Inside were documents I'd kept out of instinct, not intention. Things that felt important even when I didn't yet know why. I pulled out a thick legal envelope, yellowed slightly at the edges, and then I remembered. Ashley's boutique was weeks, days from collapsing. Eviction notices, suppliers threatening repossession. She'd shown up at our house on a Tuesday night, mascara streaked, voice shaking, saying she'd do anything if I could save her business. Anything. I slid the document out, a notarized equity transfer agreement. I read it again slowly, even though I knew every word by heart. In exchange for $28,000 in emergency funding and operating capital, Ashley transferred 51% ownership of Moonstone Boutique to me. Majority ownership. Control. Decision-making power. I sat back in my chair, the weight of it settling into my chest. Not as triumph, but as clarity. I hadn't taken advantage of her. I'd protected myself. I remembered explaining the terms at our kitchen table, Ashley reading it line by line, her lawyer, reviewing it. The notary stamp, the witnesses, everything done cleanly, legally, transparently. And for 4 years, I'd done nothing with it. I let her run the business. Let her pretend it was entirely hers. Let her keep every dollar of profit. I stayed invisible because I thought that's what kindness looked like. But kindness without boundaries had turned into permission. I realized then this wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. They had built a narrative where I was useless, dependent, insignificant, and the truth destroyed that narrative completely. The next morning, I woke up calm, not angry, not shaky, certain. I dressed carefully, not to impress, but to remind myself who I was. Clean lines, neutral colors, grounded. Samuel watched me from the doorway. "You're really going through with this," he said. "I already did," I replied. That afternoon, I placed the documents neatly into my briefcase because for the first time in 9 years, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was acting. And I knew exactly what I was walking into. Sunday afternoon arrived with brutal clarity. For the first time in 9 years, I wasn't dreading family dinner. Not because I expected warmth, but because I knew this would be the last time I sat at that table as their silent buffer. I dressed simply. Clean jeans, a button-down, nothing flashy. The same kind of outfit that had earned condescending looks for years. But this time, I carried my leather briefcase, the one I used for real business meetings. Inside it, a manila folder held documents that would end a long-running lie. The drive was silent. Samuel stared out the window, jaw tight, like he still believed this could be smoothed over. I focused on the road, oddly calm. There was no adrenaline left, only resolve. Helen opened the door with her usual rehearsed warmth. "Emily, dear," she said, smile never reaching her eyes. "I trust you're feeling better after last weekend's little misunderstanding." Little misunderstanding. The living room looked the same as always. Robert with his bourbon, Derek pretending not to exist. Ashley sitting rigid, arms crossed, fury radiating off her like heat. She didn't wait. "Okay," she snapped. "What is your problem? Do you have any idea what you put me through this week?" I set my briefcase down slowly and looked around the room. "My problem," I said calmly, "is being disrespected by people I've been supporting for years." Ashley laughed bitterly. "Supporting? Don't flatter yourself. I built my business from scratch." I opened my briefcase. "Did you?" I asked, pulling out the equity transfer agreement. The room shifted. Robert leaned forward, putting on his reading glasses. I handed him the document and watched his face change as he scanned the pages. "This says," he began, voice faltering, "that in exchange for $28,000, I said evenly, Ashley transferred 51% ownership of Moonstone Boutique to me." Ashley lunged for the papers. "That's not fair. I was desperate." "You had a lawyer," I replied. "A lawyer I paid for. He reviewed every line." Helen looked stunned. "Why didn't you tell us?" "Because I was trying to be kind," I said, "and kindness made me invisible." Robert stood, trying to regain authority. "You're tearing this family apart." "No," I said quietly. "I'm showing you who's been holding it together." I laid out the rest of the documents across the coffee table. Bank statements, canceled checks, transfer confirmations, Ashley's bailouts, Derek's legal fees, Helen and Robert's property taxes. Over $80,000. Silence swallowed the room. "I want acknowledgement," I said. "That's all." Ashley stared at the contract like it might bite her. "I want my business back." "Then buy me out," I said. "Market value, plus principal, plus interest." Her face drained of color. "I don't have that money." "Then," I said calmly, "you work for me." The room exploded, voices overlapping, accusations flying, but I stayed seated, composed, watching 9 years of denial finally collapse under the weight of facts. A week later, the lawsuit came. Ashley sued me, claiming emotional distress, exploitation, manipulation. I expected it. I called my attorney, and 3 weeks after that, her lawyer requested a settlement conference. I declined. The courtroom was quiet when the judge ruled in my favor. Clear contract, independent legal counsel, 4 years of compliance. No fraud, no coercion. Ashley cried, not from sadness, but from rage. When I turned to look for Samuel, he wasn't there. He left without a word. 6 months later, my house is quiet in a different way, peaceful. Samuel moved out 2 weeks after the verdict. Keys on the counter. No goodbye, no apology. I cook for myself now. Real meals, honest ones. I sketch in the mornings, work without interruption, breathe without bracing. Ashley's boutique still exists. Barely. Independence is expensive when you're no longer subsidized. I haven't exercised my ownership rights. I don't need to, because the truth already did the work for me. 6 months later, my mornings are quiet in a way I never knew I needed. I sit on the back deck with a cup of coffee, watching sunlight filter through the oak trees in the yard. The air smells like damp earth and fresh leaves. There's no urgency anymore. No one waiting for me to fix something they broke. No invisible deadlines tied to someone else's crisis. Tuesday used to mean family dinners, emotional labor, and unspoken expectations. Now, it means nothing. And that freedom still feels unreal sometimes. Samuel moved out 2 weeks after the court ruling. He packed while I was in a client meeting, left his keys on the kitchen counter, and disappeared into a life where he didn't have to confront the consequences of 9 years of silence. There was no dramatic goodbye, no apology, no moment of clarity, just absence. And strangely, that was enough. I sketch now, not because I need to prove anything, but because I want to. Charcoal mostly, sometimes watercolor when I'm feeling brave. I draw the city as it is, not as it pretends to be. Quiet corners, empty benches, honest shadows. Ashley's boutique is still open, barely. Turns out running a business without invisible support is harder than posting inspirational quotes about hustle. I haven't demanded profit shares, haven't interfered. I don't need to. Independence teaches its own lessons. Sometimes I think about dating again. There's a man at the bookstore downtown, paint on his hands, real books under his arm, conversations that don't feel like negotiations. Maybe something will happen. Maybe it won't. For the first time in 9 years, I'm okay not knowing. Because here's what I learned. When someone calls you useless, they're not describing your worth. They're revealing how much they depended on you and how little they respected the weight you carried. And the moment you stop carrying it, that's when you find out who you really are. I'm lighter now, not because I lost people, but because I finally stopped losing myself.